We were cleaning out my grandfather's basement, a tomb of dust and memories, when we found the door, a heavy, steel thing set into the concrete wall, with a lock that looked brand new. The rest of the house was a time capsule of the kind gentleman we'd known, well-thumbed books, faded photographs of fishing trips, the faint, comforting smell of pipe tobacco. But this door was cold, industrial, and utterly out of place. It had no handle, just a keyhole. My dad, his face grim, went out to the garage and returned with a crowbar. The shriek of metal tearing away from the frame echoed through the dusty silence. The door swung inward on silent hinges, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that smelled of sweat and something faintly metallic, like old pennies. The room was small, no bigger than a prison cell. A bare, stained mattress lay on the concrete floor. The walls around it were covered, not in wallpaper or paint, but in thousands of deep, frantic scratch marks, gouged into the concrete as if by desperate, bare hands. But it was what was on the far wall that made the breath catch in my throat. Dozens of photographs were pinned there in a chaotic collage. They were all of me. Me as a teenager, asleep in my childhood bed. Me in my first apartment, passed out on the couch after a long shift. Me last summer, sleeping on a lounge chair in my own backyard. They were taken through windows, from across the street, from the shadows of my own garden. They chronicled my entire life, all without my knowledge. My mother let out a choked sob and fled upstairs. My dad stood frozen in the doorway, his face ashen. I stepped inside, my legs moving on autopilot, drawn by a horrific, morbid curiosity. The photos were recent. The one from my backyard was from just 2 weeks ago. My grandfather had been in a hospice bed then, heavily medicated, days from the end. Out, beneath the photos was a small, wooden shelf. On it sat a single, old-fashioned dictaphone, the kind that uses microcassettes. My hand trembled as I pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the small, cold room, but it was strained, choked with a terror I'd never heard in him. "It's getting stronger," he whispered, the recording fuzzy with static. "The moon is full tonight. I can feel it scratching at the inside of my skull, trying to get out. I have to lock myself in. For their safety. For Sarah's safety." My name. A dry, ragged sob. "It only wants to watch. It doesn't mean to scare her. It just loves her. But it's not me. God help me, it's not me when it happens." The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. I looked from the desperate scratch marks on the walls to the photos of my most vulnerable, private moments. This wasn't the work of a predator. This was the lair of something that had been caged. My sweet, gentle grandfather had been locking himself in here, fighting a battle against something inside him that none of us ever saw. A cold realization washed over me. The lock. It wasn't to keep people out. It was to keep something in. My dad finally found his voice. A hoarse whisper, "We need to call the police." But I was barely listening. My eyes were fixed on the scratch marks near the doorframe. Mixed in with the chaotic gouge was a pattern, carved over and over with a frantic, precise urgency. It was a date. Tonight's date. And as I stood there, the final piece of the horrible puzzle clicked into place. The full moon. The thing he'd locked away. The thing that loved to watch me sleep. My grandfather was gone. He wasn't here to lock himself in anymore. The overhead light in the basement flickered once, then died, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt solid. From the top of the stairs, the basement door we'd left open swung shut with a soft, definitive click. We heard the deadbolt slide home. And from the darkness around us, from a corner of the basement far from the secret room, came a new sound. A soft, dry, scraping sound, like old bones slowly getting to their feet. And then the sound of quiet. MESURED footsteps started moving toward us through the absolute black. The first message appeared a week after they lowered my wife's casket into the cold, November ground. A single word beaded on the bathroom mirror, "Misayu." I told myself it was a trick of the steam from the shower. A desperate mind seeking patterns in chaos. Grief does funny things. But the next day, it happened again. The air was thick with the scent of her eucalyptus body wash, a smell I couldn't bring myself to remove from the shower caddy. As the hot water fogged the glass, letters began to form. Not as a faint condensation, but as if someone had traced them with a precise, dry finger. Leaving stark, clear lines in the mist. Saw cold, it read, a shiver, entirely separate from the room's warmth, crawled down my spine. The messages became a grim ritual. Every morning, I'd step from the shower with a knot of dread in my stomach, my eyes darting to the mirror before I even toweled off. The words were always brief, always in that same, familiar, looping cursive she used to use for love notes on the fridge. Alone, can't through, care. Each one was a needle of ice plunged into my heart. I stopped having friends over. I started showering with the bathroom door open, the hall light blazing, as if the illumination could ward off whatever was happening. I tried to rationalize it. A leaky pipe was warping the wall behind the mirror. Perhaps a neighbor's Wi-Fi signal was somehow interfering. Pathetic. Desperate theories that crumbled to dust the moment the next message appeared. I even tried to recreate it myself, writing on the mirror with my own finger after a shower. It just smeared. The words she left were perfect, crisp, and they lingered far longer than the rest of the steam, as if held in place by a chill I couldn't feel. This morning, the silence felt heavier. The drip of the faucet was a metronome counting down to something. The steam curled through the air, clinging to my skin like a damp shroud. I couldn't bring myself to look. I toweled my hair, my back to the mirror, the fine hairs on my neck standing upright. The room was too hot, suffocating, but a cold dread was crystallizing in my veins. I had to look. I always looked. I turned slowly. The message was already there, waiting for me. 2 words, shorter than the others, but they sucked the air from my lungs. Behind you. My blood turned to slush. The world shrank to the feel of the wet tiles beneath my feet, the drip 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 of the shower, and the immense, terrifying space directly behind my back. The steam swirled in that space, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought I saw a shape coalesce within it, a suggestion of height, a curve of a shoulder that wasn't my own reflected in the mirror. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My reflection was pale, wide-eyed with a terror so pure it was almost childish. My own eyes pleaded with me from the glass. "Don't turn around," they screamed. "Whatever you do, don't turn around." But a force stronger than fear, a perverse and crushing need to know, began to turn my body. It was a slow, creaking pivot, every muscle fiber screaming in protest. The space behind me was empty. Just the shower stall, still spitting droplets, the translucent curtain hanging limp. Just the foggy air. A sob of relief caught in my throat, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. It was a trick. A final, cruel joke played by my broken mind. I leaned against the sink, my legs buckling, the cold porcelain a shock against my bare hip. And then I felt it, a breath. Not my own. It was a sigh, faint and impossibly cold, washing over the back of my neck. It carried a scent within it, not the eucalyptus from the shower, but the faint, unmistakable, and now horrifyingly out of place fragrance of lilies. The scent from the funeral home, the scent that had filled our living room for a week after she died. The breath faded. The room was silent again, save for the frantic hammering of my heart against my ribs. I am still sitting on the cold bathroom floor. I haven't moved. I dare not look up, because the steam is starting to clear from the mirror. And from the corner of my eye I can see a new word beginning to form, letter by slow, deliberate letter. It's not written for me to see later. It's being written right now. The last night of spring break clung to the air in Indiana, a chill that promised winter's stubborn refusal to fully leave. In a quiet house nestled against a dense wall of woods, the only defiance was the thrum of bass from the garage where Mark and his 3 friends Kyle, Heenan, and Derek were celebrating their final hours of freedom. The idea, like so many bad ideas, was Kyle's. "Let's get in the hot tub." The cold made the thought of warm water irresistible. Minutes later, they were submerged under the patio deck, steam rising around them, their laughter punctuating the still night. It was past midnight, and the woods behind the house were a dark, silent void. Then the silence broke. It was the sharp, unmistakable snap of a twig, then another, a slow, deliberate crunching of footsteps moving through the dry undergrowth. Too heavy for a deer, too purposeful for a raccoon. The laughter died in their throats. "Probably nothing," Keenan said, his voice tighter than he intended. Someone turned the music up, a weak attempt to drown out the sudden, primal fear. About 10 minutes later, a man stepped from the tree line into the dim patio light. He was tall and naturally thin, and dressed in a long black coat, white sweatpants, and a gaming headset. His eyes were wide, glassy, and utterly vacant. The boys froze, a chorus of "Who are you?" and "What the hell?" breaking the silence. The man raised his hands, palms out. "My name is Seth," he said, his voice flat. "I'm 33. I heard you laughing. I wanted to join." Before anyone could process the absurdity, Seth began to undress. He shed his coat, his shoes, and finally his sweatpants. Standing there in only his underwear before sliding into the steaming water opposite them, the violation was so surreal, so complete, that no one moved. Mark's hand, acting on its own, pulled out his phone and began to record. They asked him frantic questions: where he came from, if he knew anyone there. He just repeated himself, a broken record of wanting to hang out. Then his flat, emotionless voice cut through the steam again. "I molested a child." Spell shattered. In a chaotic scramble, they erupted from the top, yelling. Pulling his limp form from the water, Seth offered no resistance. He simply stood on the cold patio, dripping, his empty eyes fixed on them. Then, without a word, he turned and walked slowly back into the darkness of the woods. Inside, they locked every door. Nervous laughter echoed through the house. A feeble attempt to normalize the unthinkable, but the dread remained. A cold weight in their stomachs. 15 minutes later, Kyle suggested they go back out to secure the hot tub cover. Armed with flashlights, they stepped back into the night. Mark's beam swept the deck and froze on an object lying by the tub's edge, a phone. He picked it up. The screen lit up at his touch, and whatever image was on the lock screen made him recoil as if burned. He dropped it, his face pale. "We need to go now." They were barely inside when the tapping started, a soft, persistent asterisk tap. Tap, tap asterisk on the living room window. Mark already knew. He pulled the curtain back. Seth was there. His pale face was pressed almost against the glass, those wide and blinking eyes staring in. A thin, horrifying smile was stretched across his lips. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared. Kyle called the police while Mark grabbed a bat, yelling through the door for Seth to leave. In response, Seth slowly turned and walked around the side of the house. Mark followed his movement through the windows, his heart hammering against his ribs. Seth was standing on the patio again, staring through the sliding glass door. "The cops are coming," Mark screamed. Seth's arm slowly raised. He gave a single, deliberate wave. Then he turned and vanished into the woods for the final time. The police found him standing at the tree line, just staring toward the house. They arrested him for trespassing. The incident was closed. But for Mark, it wasn't over. A few days later, a Snapchat story from a girl in a neighboring subdivision lit up his phone. The video showed a different man, tall, thin, with the same vacant eyes trying the handle of her back door late at night. A cold realization settled over him. Seth wasn't a singular monster. He was a symptom. There were more of them out there. They were connected. And they were just getting started. The memory of that night fused with another local story he'd heard, one that now felt eerily relevant. Years ago, 3 high school friends, Beck, Matthew, and Tyler, decided to explore a forbidden sewer tunnel that ran under a frozen creek near some abandoned offices. They'd been chased out once by police, but their curiosity drew them back. They ventured into the round, dark mouth of the tunnel. their weak flashlights dancing over graffiti-scarred walls. One marking stood out, a fresh spray-painted date, June 19th, 19 in lurid red. The air grew unnaturally cold, their breath pluming in the beam of their lights, icicles, sharp as spears. Hung from the ceiling, then a sound echoed from the impenetrable blackness ahead aloud. Definitive crack like stone splitting under immense weight. It wasn't them. They fled in a blind panic, stumbling into the welcome cold of the night. Outside and gasping for air, Beck realized he dropped his phone, against his friend's terrified pleas. He insisted on going back. The tunnel felt different this time, heavier, darker. As if the darkness itself had become aware of their return, their lights seemed weaker. The silence more profound and menacing. They found the phone. But as they pressed deeper, a scream tore through the tunnel, raw, human, and terrifyingly close. This time they ran and didn't stop until they were miles away. They thought it was over when they got home. They tried to bury the fear. But late that night, Beck's doorbell rang twice into the silent, sleeping house. His father answered to an empty porch. Was it a prank? A coincidence? Or had something from that cold, dark place followed the sound of their voices, the light of their screens, all the way home? Perhaps some places, and some people, are listening more closely than we know, and perhaps some things are better left unfound. For a week, I've been waking up with my hands caked in dry, dark soil and the taste of earth thick on my tongue, my sheets streaked with grime from a place I couldn't remember going. My doctor said it was severe sleepwalking, a stress response. He suggested a camera. That night, I set up my phone on the dresser, pointed at my bed, and fell into a sleep so deep and black it felt like being submerged in oil. The next morning, the dirt was under my fingernails again, and a single brittle oak leaf was stuck to my pillow, my heart hammering. I fumbled for the phone and played the video. The timestamp read to 47 a.m. The footage showed me sitting up in bed, my movements stiff, mechanical. My eyes were open, but they were wrong, glassy and unfocused. Reflecting the moonlight like polished stones, I stood, walked to the closet not to get a jacket, but to retrieve the old gardening trowel I kept there. Then I left the frame. The camera only caught the bedroom, but the audio kept recording. I heard the soft click of the back door opening, and then nothing but the whisper of the wind for a long, long time. An hour and 17 minutes later, the door clicked shut again. I walked back into frame, the trowel clutched in my filthy hand, my gait still that of a marionette. I got back into bed and went still. The video ended. Pure, cold terror is a quiet thing. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it just drains all the warmth from the world. That night, I didn't just set up the camera. I bought a headlamp with a built-in camera, a tiny, lightweight thing. I strapped it to my forehead, my hands shaking. I was no longer a curious patient. I was a detective investigating a crime I was committing against myself. I woke up at 3:03 a.m. I was already standing. The world was a shaky, bobbing view through the headlamp's lens. I was outside. The cold night air bit my skin, but I didn't feel it. I was walking with that same terrible purpose, past the property line and into the dense woods behind my house. Branches scraped against the camera lens, but the body I was trapped inside didn't flinch. It knew exactly where it was going. The view settled on a small, familiar clearing. The gnarled oak tree my neighbors called the wishing tree stood in the center, its roots bulging from the ground like veins. My hand, caked in fresh mud, reached out and placed the trowel against the base of the tree. And I began to dig, not frantic, panic digging, slow, deliberate, rhythmic scoops of dark, loamy soil. The sound was immense in the silent woods, the shick of the metal biting into the earth, the soft thud of dirt being tossed aside. I dug for what felt like an eternity. My breathing the only other sound, steady and unnervingly calm. Then, the trowel hit something with a soft, damp thud. Not a rock. Something else. My hands dropped the tool and began clawing at the earth, fingers raking through the soil with a frantic energy they hadn't shown before. They scraped away the dirt, revealing something pale and smooth beneath. A length of weathered bone. A piece of old pottery. It was a rib cage. A small, delicate, human rib cage, still partially encased in the earth, and nestled within the brittle arch of bones was a locket, tarnished and blackened. Exactly like the one my little sister wore the day she disappeared 20 years ago. My hand reached into the hole, my fingers closing around the locket. And then, a voice that was not my own, a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to come from my own throat, spoke into the silent night. "Almost home," it whispered. The video cut out. I woke up in my bed, the morning sun spearing through my window. My hands were clean. The headlamp was on my nightstand. And resting on my chest, cold against my skin, was the tarnished locket. I can't bring myself to open it. I can still feel the chill of the earth clinging to it, and the echo of that voice that used my throat. It wasn't sleepwalking. It was a delivery. And whatever brought this back to me is still here, waiting for its next message to be delivered. In April of 2022, I took a construction job deep in the rural countryside, far from home. The pay was decent, and I needed the money. The fact that my longtime friend Jim was also on the crew made it an easy choice. We figured it'd be a change of pace, extra cash, time away, and a little peace. The work was fine, but the location, it was remote. Miles of winding roads with hardly a house in sight. Most of the guys spent their weekends drinking in town, but I've always preferred the quiet. So that Friday, I packed my gear and headed into the woods just 5 minutes from our site. 20 minutes in, and the world fell away. Just the sound of the wind and my own footsteps. I smoked a joint, let the stress melt off my shoulders. For a while, it was perfect. But as the sun began to set around 7 p.m., painting the forest in long, dark shadows, I caught a strange scent in the air, burning wood. A haze of smoke drifted between the trees. And through the branches, I saw it, a faint orange glow. Curiosity got the better of me. I left the trail and moved toward the light. That's when I saw the shopping carts. Dozens of them, tied to trees with thick rope, hanging from branches like some kind of rusted, metallic fruit. Some were mangled, twisted into bizarre shapes. It didn't look like a camp. It looked like a warning. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. No one would believe this otherwise. Then I saw it hung directly over the fire was a charred, old-fashioned duck ornament. On its back sat a scorched baby doll, melted and warped from the heat. I took a photo of that, too. My chest tightened. The fire was roaring. Someone had been here recently. Maybe they were still here. I told myself it was nothing. Just some weirdo. Probably harmless. But I checked over my shoulder all the same as I put distance between me and that place. I set up my own camp about an hour later, built a small fire, cooked dinner, smoked another joint. By 9 p.m., I was listening to a true crime podcast, trying to shake the knees. I must have dozed off. I woke up suddenly at 4 a.m. The fire had died down to embers. The air was ice cold. And that's when I heard it whizzing. A slow, eerie tune weaving through the trees around my camp. I froze. My body went numb. The whizzing stopped. Then came the footsteps, light, fast, circling my tent. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them crunching twigs, shifting leaves. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then instinct took over. I threw on my boots and zipped the tent and burst out into the night. But the footsteps, they were coming from the direction of the trail. The way back was blocked out, so I ran. I ran deeper into the woods, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. Behind me, the footsteps multiplied. They weren't in sync. There were at least 2 of them. Maybe more. I ran until I couldn't breathe, then dove into a thicket, burying myself under leaves and dirt. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The footsteps faded, but I waited what felt like hours before I crawled out. I moved slowly, carefully, until the trees began to thin. Then I sprinted. I didn't stop until I saw the trailhead. I didn't look back. The police took my statement. They never followed up. I finished my contract and got out of there. But I still have the photos, the cards, the doll, and I still hear that whistling sometimes when it's too quiet. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if it was a cult or something worse, but I do know this: if something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't wait to find out why. I almost did, and some nights I still wonder if I ever really got away.